Great to see you all. It's been a great day so far. I love AWE. It's like a big club and we're all in it together. And I was excited this morning when we saw that at least a lot of the people at this morning's sessions were first timers at AWE. So welcome to the club. I've written a new book and I won't delay in telling you a little bit about it. Sound? It's called Convergence, or How the World Will Be Painted with Data. Everywhere you look, everyone you meet, everywhere you go, everything will be painted with an invisible layer of data. So grab your brush, I mean your smartphone, and let's dive in.
Everything will be painted, looks more like flooded. Someone get a mop.
It's an AR-enabled book. It works with a kind of augmented reality called marker-based AR. So Vuforia detects certain markers, and it brings up an augmented reality scene. And there are 50 scenes in this book, many more than there were in the first book, and many terrific companies represented here were contributors. Speaking of contributors, the new book was written by 40 people. Many of them are speakers here and are well known. I don't know how many of them are in the audience. Stand up if you're a contributor to the book. Amy Peck was a contributor to the book. Kathy Hackle was a contributor to the book. Tony Parisi, Amy Lemaire, thank you very much. Tom Emmerich. Alan Smithson, couldn't be more flattered by their contributions. I have learned so much from you. So thank you. I'm also really proud that of the 40 contributors, 17 of them were women. So we are slowly introducing true diversity of thought into our industry, which is really, really important, especially in these early stages of development, and especially because there's so many talented and knowledgeable women making enormous contributions. And so I was really proud to be able to achieve that level of parity, which is not always so easy in the technology business. I would also like to say, I don't know if Mike Levine is in here, but he and his company, Happy Giant, were the developers of the app. We worked closely together. It was a lot of fun and really, really hard. And, but we got it done and we made the deadline and the book worked at South by Southwest. So thanks, Mike. So let's talk about convergence. Everybody here today talked about convergence because we are at a very specific moment in history. We are on the cusp of a change that is historic. And when I talk about history and the phases of development of technology, of course, we all know that's accelerating. But a little history lesson, I think, to give us some perspective on this medium and how quickly it's developing is useful. So the first industrial revolution was ignited by a number of technologies, but none more profound than the steam engine. Changed transportation, for example. The railroads. Changed time and space. And then we go into the modern age, which persisted for, was 200 years before we went from the industrial age to the age of science, where the electrification of the world and the turbine engine changed everything, right? All of a sudden we had appliances, telephones, televisions, and these incredible inventions that changed humanity. And that's really, when I talk about convergence and these inflection points, that's really what we're talking about, right? Is the augmentation of humanity. Things that make us better, faster, and smarter. No better example than this phone. Which connects me to all of the knowledge in the world. And there are people all over the earth who have no possessions to speak of, and they live with outdoor plumbing and dirt floors, but they have one of these. And that really is changing life as we know it. We also know that this is a dastardly form factor, and we'll get into that too. The digital age, which started arguably around 1980, also changed our lives profoundly. Most of you were born after this happened, but those of us who were there find it hard today to imagine how two people could have met for a date or a meeting. How did we get all those things done? Well, we were using landline telephones. And it was a very, very different kind of world. And that world has accelerated, so in just 40 years after that revolution began, we are on the cusp of enormous change. And that change is driven by the convergence of a number of different technologies. Yes, AR is very important, and this is an AR-focused conference, but it's not just about AR. AR is maturing alongside of a number of other technologies in the same way that aerospace developed alongside of the piston engine. In this case, we have a number of digital technologies which are coming together to change life as we know it again. This is pretty incredible. 200 years from the Industrial Revolution to the modern age, and 40 years from the introduction of computers to this new age of the augmented man. So we see these different kinds of technologies all have a role to play. The Holy Grail, the moment we will know that this has really come to pass, is when we live in a world where computing is invisible, ubiquitous, and wearable. And in fact, the evidence is all around us in little pieces, right? They haven't yet converged, right? They haven't yet become a device that we all use the way we use our smartphone. But it's happening. And there is no better place than AWE to see all those pieces moving around in this primordial ooze that ultimately is going to create a new organism that will have its own life and bring its own changes to us, intended and unintended, right? Because everything has an equal and opposite reaction. We thought the internet, not to digress too much, but of course we thought the internet was going to make us more free, right? We thought the internet was going to free us from the media overlords. And all of a sudden, democracy would spring up over the world because the truth cannot be suppressed on the internet. And of course, we didn't realize that lies cannot be suppressed on the internet either. So the thing we thought that would make us free actually may make us less free. So beware in all of these things of the unintended consequences. But of course, we're human and we rush toward the future regardless of what the consequences are. And there is no stopping technology, right? It is a life force. It is what animates us as humans, and particularly everybody in this room. This is what we do. So what does zero latency cloud computing mean? Well, the first thing, of course, it means the end of the app, right? Everything you're going to do on your device is going to be done in the cloud. So that's going to lead to a radically different form factor of these devices because they're going to have more sensors, but they're going to need less of a hard drive because everything is going to be grabbed from the cloud. So the implications of that are, for example, the end of the App Store and good riddance, because the apps we need will get just in time and contextual, and then they will go away. So it means the end of the news feed. Again, thank God, because the things in the news feed will suddenly become spatial, and they'll become contextual. We talked about changes in the form of handheld computing, but what we didn't talk about is the content, right? It's still a 2D screen, right? So we have this vast world of information, but we're consuming it the same way we did in the 70s, off of a two-dimensional screen. So Mike Pell writes in Convergence about how this most basic, humble form of communication, which is text, which is still the way we consume almost everything, text will change. Text will exist in space and have dimension. And that context, that change in context, is going to have a profound effect on meaning and communication. Of course, convergence also means platform innovation. The guys who created the steam engine didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't understand the factory and automation and the assembly line. But it became the first source of power. And of course, it also means, this world of zero latency, ubiquitous computing, that we will live in a world painted with data, which is the subtitle of the book. Every person, every place, everything will be painted with an invisible layer of data. So let's drill down on that a little bit. The first concept, which I will go into tomorrow in a fireside chat with the great Kevin Kelly, the founding editor of Wired magazine and my idol, whom I imitate slavishly, because his approach to talking about technology is to talk about it through the filter of sociology, right? To talk about how does technology affect our lives? What does it really mean to us? What are we going to use it for? And how potentially is it going to change us? The mirror world, and one of the problems we have, of course, when we talk about spatial computing, is there is no HTML, right? Without HTML, there is no Google. How do you search the internet without HTML? And in the same way, Ori talked this morning about the Wikipedia for the real world. But it needs an underlying layer which can unify it and make it searchable. Of course, mirror worlds refers specifically to the digital twin of the real world mapped exactly onto it, right? So there's a digital twin of a tree, and it is automatically and perfectly mapped to that tree so that you can anchor content to that tree, and that anchored content can become searchable. Because one of the important ideas behind spatial computing is we want to find content where and when we need it. How are we going to know that it's there? How is the AI that controls these devices going to know? How is it going to tell us, hey, Charlie, there's relevant information here that you might want to see? Well, of course, we will need a system of filters to do that. What will the content be? Well, for better or worse, it's going to be a lot like the content we already are consuming, but placed spatially and consumed in a contextually relevant time and place. For example, I don't want to see pictures of food in a news feed. The heck good is that? I want to see pictures of food when I'm in the restaurant where you took it. So that's going to lead to a huge change, but I don't want to see everybody's pictures of food in the restaurant. I just want to see the pictures of food from people that I know, from people in my social graph. So that social graph will continue to have a tremendous amount of importance in a visual spatial world. But the issue of filters is an important one, and I'll come back to it, because the last thing we want to do is be interrupted by information that is not relevant to us, right? Can you imagine there's that nightmarish video called Hypervision, where the poor person is on the bus and she's just being assaulted from every direction by advertisements and is a slave to the images that she is seeing in front of us. That would be a nightmarish conclusion. And of course, it's impossible because no one would wear those glasses. The other concept that I want to talk about just for a second, and we'll get into it more, is this idea of layers. So there is this layer, which is the mirror world, which is the anchor, the searchable anchor to which all this content is going to be appended. But there's not just going to be one layer. There are going to be a lot of layers. So how those layers interact with each other and when and where they interact with each other is what Magic Leap refers to as the magic verse. There are a lot of other names for it, but the magic verse is pretty poetic, and I appreciate that about Magic Leap. One really interesting implication, of course, is that once you have a mirror world, you can manipulate the world, which is what Snap has just introduced with a feature called landmarkers, right? So it's a little bit like the new Google Maps. You hyper-localize based on your location and based on computer vision. So you have an exact map of the US Capitol or the Eiffel Tower or another landmark, and you can manipulate it through your camera. So you can make it disappear, you can make it dance, and you can make it disappear, which is a new phrase called diminished reality, if you haven't heard that one. We keep coming up with new X-reality words, but I do like diminished reality, this idea that you could be walking down the street and instead of a building, there's a field. You could be walking down the street and with facial recognition, everybody could look like they're a character from Toontown. But we are a long way from that because we are in a mobile-first world right now that is not going to change right away, even though AR is taking a lot of the apps that we use every day and making them better, right? There is no AR app. AR is a quality that good apps like Google Maps have, and that quality makes them more useful. It enhances what we're already doing. We already have a smartphone, and there's no additional cost or effort. It just is what a new app is. Now, mobile computing, as we all well know, and as I said, is a dastardly form factor. It's very cumbersome. It is very hard. I've got right forearm tendonitis right now, and when I hold up my phone all day long, it is really painful. And the tyranny of the app is also oppressive. You can't find anything in the App Store. I know there are a lot of content creators in here who are brutalized by the difficulty of presenting content through the App Store. You have paper hanger syndrome. You really can't use, and this is actually a brilliant feature of Google Maps, is they understand you're not going to hold up your phone for very long. So they've built the AR local wayfinding directions into little bite-sized pieces that are consistent with the way we use it, right? Because I'll hold it up like this to see where I'm going, but then I'm going to put it down. It is not like a persistent illusion that I might have through augmented reality glasses of some kind. And then, of course, it's not always on. I mean, it's always in our pocket, but it's not always in our world. And often when it wants us, it interrupts us. So the benefit of having it and having our heads looking up at the world instead of down at our hands or time shifting between the physical world and the digital world in our hands. The solution, of course, would be a wearable of some kind. But there are strong headwinds against wearables, and I know everybody here is in some way helping to find a solution to that, but it isn't obvious. First of all, and I know this is heresy and a terrible thing to say at this conference, but there is no actual proof that people will wear this on their head. Now, I don't know if my friend Ted Chilowitz was here, but of course he'd say, well, you're wearing these, but these don't. He says, you're wearing these, so when the form factor is like this, it'll just be like when you took your analog mobile phone in to Verizon and they said, hey, would you like a phone that does email? It doesn't cost extra. And you say, yes, please. So maybe someday you'll go into Warby Parker and you'll say to them, I need new glasses. And they'd say, well, would you like your glasses to do the internet? Would you like them to interface with your phone? Would you like them to reveal the magic verse? Well, yes, I guess I would. But then I might ask, but do I need a second device? Do I have to plug them in? How much does it cost? These things are going to happen very slowly. I'll give you a good example. How many people here are wearing an Apple Watch? Well, that is pretty incredible. It looks like about 3% of the forward-looking, technologically literate people at this conference are using an Apple Watch. And by the way, you Apple Watch wearers, you love your Apple Watch, right? I mean, the Apple Watch is pretty cool. So you see how much resistance there is to a new device. So even if we solved the problem, we still don't have a way of people rushing out to get them. Now, it's not quite as dire as that. But these are all issues, right? Most AR glasses today don't have prescription compatibility, which is ridiculous. I mean, it's a primary condition of a head-worn device that 50% of us who wear glasses are going to want to have our prescription built into them. And we all know limits in field of view. There's arguments about how much that matters. And of course, what is the operating system for the glasses? Is it a peripheral to your phone, or are they standalone? But the most important question to me as a consumer, what do they do? Why do I want them? What is the value proposition? Because when I said, would you like email with your smartphone, you said, yes, I would, because you knew exactly what that meant. But if you take the case of General Magic, which is a company that was founded in the late 80s, it was a spin-off from Apple. General Magic introduced the General Magic Communicator, which was a smartphone, in 1995, when most people didn't even have AOL. Right? And people were like, why do I need to have work email with me all the time? And the company failed. They sold less than 5,000 of the communicators. So that, of course, is a tremendous liability to us, right? That we're developing something. We are a solution in search of a problem. In the case of Magic Leap, they had the solution. People just hadn't gotten to the problem yet. So I would say that the solution lies in something we're already doing. The solution lies in sound, because it's something we're already doing. Everybody's got these, right? Everybody's got them. Why can't sound meet sensors and do a lot of the things that we're thinking that glasses are going to do? I'll give you an example. A use case that people in this business love to use is you're walking to the subway and your glasses tell you that the A train is on time. Well, as a New Yorker, I can tell you the A train during rush hour comes every 6 minutes, so if it's not on time, there'll be another one in 6 minutes. So I don't know that I need to be interrupted to be told that. And maybe what would be better is I'm wearing my ear pods and I'm listening to NPR News or whatever, and it pauses NPR News and it says, Charlie, the A train is on time and your first meeting is at 9:30. That's it. That would be useful, and it wouldn't be interruptive. It wouldn't be like I'm talking to somebody and all of a sudden there's a message in my glasses like, you're talking to somebody wearing the North glasses. I hate to pick on North because I really like the company. But honestly, if we're at lunch and my face starts lighting up and I'm reading, it's going to be pretty rude. So these social issues with regard to new technology are real. But people wear these earbuds all day long, and it is not weird to talk to somebody wearing AirPods. And of course, Bose has brilliantly introduced a solution which is integrated in something we're already doing. There are going to be prescription lenses for these, and although they're not showing us digital illusions, these are spatial glasses. You make telephone calls with them. They're entirely private. They don't look too bad, especially on her. And they are, may well be, right, there are two ways into the brain, right? One is optically, through the eyes, and the other is orally, through the ears. So it may be that the first beachhead for AR is going to be sound. There's another idea that I've been thinking about a lot recently, and this is actually not in the book. This is a new idea. See-through versus pass-through. Now, by see-through, I mean any device that lets you see the real world in real time and is simply providing a digital layer, or in the case of Magic Leap, multiple layers. But they are laid upon the real world. Pass-through is something else. Pass-through means that the world is digitized by the camera. Any augmentations happen in real time, which is what Snap landmarkers do. They're combined in real time, and you are seeing through the lens of your camera, or through this camera screen on your smartphone, you are seeing this altered, augmented reality. And the image on the bottom is one that I want to talk about in particular, because that is an image taken through the new Oculus Quest. So the new Oculus Quest may, in fact, be our first true MR device. I know Oculus is not apparently encouraging these uses, but every developer who's gotten their hands on this, it was the first thing they said. Now I can really do pass-through AR. You can truly take the images in the camera, augment them in real time, And the output is augmented reality. And this may be, you know, apologies to my friends at Magic Leap, but this may be the best method for combining the physical and the digital. The other thing that the pass-through does, which I really like, is it brings AR into VR. Right? Last year I railed about the differences between AR and VR, and this year I'm here to say they're coming together. So I was kind of wrong about that because I didn't see far enough. Right? I wouldn't say that they exist on a spectrum of more immersive or less immersive, and their use cases are very different. But we're not going to own a bunch of different devices to do things that are substantially the same. The other thing, and again, I'll credit to Ted Schilowitz and his wonderful chapter in the book, we are multitaskers, right? And we want to be connected to each other and the world no matter what we're doing. In the opening scene of Ready Player One, the main character, Wade, is entered VR, and he is walking toward the portal for the racing game that he's gonna be in, where he meets his love interest and everything else, and it kind of introduces the world. And so, like a Dick Tracy wristwatch, he is able to find and communicate with other people inside of that VR world. But it's not only those people that you want, it's the rest of the world. So in a way, it didn't go far enough, right? Because yes, you can find other people in VR, but you also want to stay anchored in this world. If you get a text message, you want to see that message, right? There's nothing more annoying. I have to say, I had this experience recently because I was obsessively playing with the Quest, and you know, my phone vibrates when I get a message. And you know, it vibrates and I'm doing something, and I'm like, oh, geez, you know, you kind of feel like it's against your nature. So I would suggest this idea that VR is better with AR in it is a really powerful idea. Also, when you're inside of VR, why can't you access the internet? You're on the internet. Why can't you use it? It's the greatest invention of all time. Why can't you use it while you're in VR? It's kind of weird. The other thing, of course, is when you start combining these viewing technology with inputs and sensors, you start to be able to do really new things. And an example that I think is very powerful is this idea of telepresence. Now, the only way to do true telepresence would be to have multiple sensors up in the room and to have a digital twin of that room. So you're deconstructed and reconstructed in this other location. There's another way, which is you use an avatar, and you animate that avatar through sensors which can map your facial expressions and your gestures, and they're, you know, and you wear them. And your avatar, whether it's from Toontown or whether it is actually a photographic image of you, can be reconstructed and animated. And AI has a lot to do with that because it has to be predictive. It has to draw the part of you that the sensors aren't seeing to create a realistic illusion. There is a company that is now taking 2D photographs and making them 3D objects by using AI to predict what we're not seeing in the photograph. And once it's gone through that system, then you have a 3D object. You could put it up on IKEA or Wayfair or anybody who's got 3D objects integrated into their platform. And I don't have time to talk about 3D a lot, but the web, as we all know, is moving toward more of a 3D paradigm where we will expect to be able to manipulate things that we see. Entertainment zones, I'll come back to this idea because it has a little bit to do with location-based entertainment and a lot to do with how 5G is going to be deployed. So how are we going to integrate the digital and the physical? We've got all these different technologies working together. Of course, one of the biggest topics in AR is the AR cloud. There is no one AR cloud, of course. There are going to be hundreds of AR clouds, and that is not going to change no matter what, right? Facebook does not want Google in its AR cloud. That is not going to happen. What we're going to need is a system of filters that is smart enough to cut across all of those layers and all of those silos. We can only do it if we have a base layer that every device understands and can be anchored to, but the silos are going to remain for the foreseeable future. AI is probably, of all the topics that we're talking about, the least understood, right? I have to blame the movies for this. Everybody thinks AR is HAL 9000. We are so far from HAL 9000, it is still science fiction. And that, of course, drives computer scientists crazy. Because, I mean, they've given up, trying to explain to people there really is no AI, because that AI implies cognition, like in the Terminator. AI, cognition is free association. It's that computer called your brain that no machine can ever replicate, because it's a combination of everything you've ever done and experienced, plus your emotions, plus context, and then it makes leaps of free association. No machine can do that. That cannot be done by a machine. So computer scientists always associate artificial intelligence with cognition. We are not talking about cognition. We are talking about better predictions. Let's talk about 5G, okay? Because that is the most important part, in a way, of what we're talking about. All these things combining together in a cloud only work in a zero latency environment, which 5G has promised. The amount of money invested in this new technology is staggering. You could almost do the Iraq War over again with $2.7 trillion. But even with that investment, there are still some really profound problems. It has, just as fiber optic cable had in its day, last mile problems. It's not so good in the house. It doesn't like to go through glass. It hates New York. You need a massive number of repeaters to get 5G in New York. You could do it in Central Park, but for me, in the narrow canyon where my building exists, I'm going to have to pay Qualcomm or Verizon or Huawei for a repeater. We're all going to need personal repeaters, and don't worry, they're going to sell them. And chances are, we're going to buy them. But it's a real issue. I wanted to talk about this idea of 5G zones, though, because that's going to happen first. This idea of a 5G mesh in a stadium. That's the kind of place we're first going to experience it. And location-based entertainment is going to be slammed pretty bad by these new devices and by this new technology, eventually. But at first, it's going to morph into these areas where there's a 5G mesh and there's a ringmaster who can bring people together to do specific things. So I don't think location-based entertainment is going to go away anytime soon, although I think the long-term prognosis for that industry is not fantastic because of the speed with which these technologies are coming together. But for some reason, the telcos have decided that now is the moment to tell the world about 5G. And of course, it's part of the trade war that's just started between the US and China, because the people who control 5G control the pipe to the cloud, where all the computing is going to take place. So that's a pretty big security issue on just about every level. I haven't talked enough about security, but every app that gets built from now on, every piece of technology is going to be built on top of a secure layer, right? There's no other way to do it. So, today, if you go to, say, sell technology, or specifically augmented reality, the first thing they ask is, well, what about security? Well, that question is not going to be asked anymore, because security is the platform. But getting back to 5G, we're a little ahead of ourselves. And when you get ahead of yourself, it leads to this. 5G and AI are just at the peak of inflated expectations. And you know what happens, of course, and I have to say myself and my colleagues in tech journalism are guilty as hell of starting this problem, because we discover something and we're like geniuses. Oh my God, 5G is going to change the world. And then, of course, a few months later, we're like, well, I don't know. Who says it's going to change the world? So you have, as the 5G hype cycle begins, the New York Times 2 weeks ago says, not so fast, right? They've written all these fawning big features on 5G, and now they're like, nah, you know, it's kind of unhelpful to be rebranding 4G LTE as 5G, which is what both Verizon and AT&T are doing. You know, there aren't really 5G phones. The ones that there are not so good. They're heavy and bulky because they have two modems in them, a 4G modem and a 5G modem. Thanks to Qualcomm, there's going to be a new Snapdragon chip that does both, which will help tremendously. I did have an interesting conversation today with Hugo Swart of Qualcomm, and I recommend his presentation tomorrow, because he's got a lot of answers to my skeptical questions about 5G, and thinks it's going to happen a lot faster than I do. So I'm thinking the convergence is 3 to 5 years away. So what are we going to do in the meantime, right? I mean, what does Magic Leap do in the meantime? Well, there are a few pretty big businesses in here that can use AR and VR very effectively without 5G and without super great AI, which really just means super great algorithms. So, but it's going to be a first adopter medium. These are useful, single-use devices that are all preliminary devices. All the AR devices you see out there on the floor tomorrow from companies like Nreal will eventually end up in Ori's AR museum with ODG and the Meta 2. So there's one big wild card, Apple. What is Apple going to do, right? Today, I think it was Tim Merrill showed a slide that said that 43% of the people interested in AR are, think that the Apple product is the best, which is kind of interesting since it doesn't exist yet and we don't know anything about it. But I do, I've been known to flirt with Mac rumors, so I'll throw one out there for you, because I keep thinking, it's going to be like the iPod. I said this last year, right? The iPod iterated itself into the iPhone. What if it's not really AR the way we're thinking about it, right? Maybe it's a media consumption machine. Maybe it's the best media consumption machine that you buy. In the same way you have a game console. It's a specialized device. You put it on at home. You don't take it anywhere. It's like you just bought the most high-definition, big-screen TV in the world, even though you might live in a 600-square-foot apartment. So I think it's very possible that this is where Apple is going, and they will iterate their way out of it as 5G and AI improve. So you might have this media consumption device that becomes a pass-through device and that becomes more and more mobile as the form factors and the supporting technologies improve. So I have run over time. I will put these slides up on SlideShare, but this sums up a lot of the ideas. I also want to make a couple of predictions. I think it's going to be epic. I think everybody sitting in this room has every chance in the world of becoming rich, and I'll tell you why. This is personal computing and the internet in 1992. That is this moment, right? And that enormous change was on the horizon. And no one really knew how huge it was going to be. It's going to be huge, but it's going to be a mess. And lots of people will stumble, and people we don't even know about, are going to form the next Google. Oh, they cut me off. That's what you get for talking too much.